Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast, where we talk about spiritual subject matters in practical ways, how to bring them into our daily lives. We are here with Achyuta Gopi, Dayal Guranga, and our live studio audience from all over the world. Thank you all for being here today. How are you both doing today, Achyuta or Dayal?
Living in the material world.
Living in the material world, and she's just.
Know that we are living.
I'm here. I made it. I made it.
I am also here. We're having another one of those mornings. I'm also here. I also made it. I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday. I wasn't feeling so well. Sometimes I get migraines in the heat, and yesterday was very hot. And
It's hot here in New York.
yeah, it was very hot and just bad sleep and migraines.
It's-
And today's but a little better.
We made it though. If you're listening right now somewhere, I just want to congratulate you that you made it. You're here with us and you're doing it.
Hmm.
I still blame the moon.
Still
I
blames the moon.
I definitely also blame the moon.
Sometimes a podcast is just us getting together and being like, "We're here. We're doing it. We still made it."
Especially a daily podcast.
Daily podcast.
Uh,
All right. Should I because you were here yesterday, Kishore, should I kick us off from yesterday?
yeah, kick us off from yesterday. Maybe a little recap because I wasn't here.
So
Yeah.
we're reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I guess I'm assuming on Monday we're gonna start reading verses, although we're gonna be in Italy next week, so we have to figure out our exact schedule. But this week we're preparing by reading Srila Prabhupada's introduction to the Bhagavad Gita to prepare our mindset to really get the most out of it. And so yesterday we were reading about taking up reading Bhagavad Gita in a spirit of devotion. Um, and Prabhupada mentioning that the purpose that we approach Bhagavad Gita in for a variety of reasons, or we approach sometimes spiritual life for a variety of reasons. And Prabhupada was mentioning that the purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to deliver us out of ignorance. And so that's what I got from yesterday, Chuta. What else did I miss?
Yesterday, we also spoke about the not just the spirit of devotion, but this idea of willing submission,
Mm,
of attitude, and kind of the way we approach life. We are able to be submissive to certain things, even though we tell ourselves, "No, I'm not. I'm not a sheep. I'm not a rule follower. I'm not one of those things." But there was no need to reinvent the wheel. Prabhupada is making a point that someone
mm,
has already found out this process. And even when someone does that in science, we don't go as a kid and decide that we are going to reinvent or redo every science experiment in order to make physics make sense. We are able to hear
mm,
submissively from a teacher.
Mm,
We are accepting that this teacher has already found out all of the pertinent information and can pass it on to us. And that is exercising a little bit of our faith the same way we do when we get on a plane, etc. We get on a
mm,
train, we start driving a car. We don't go question everybody to how exactly all of this works until it makes perfect sense to me. We're able to submit ourselves, at least theoretically, to the fact that someone has already found out all of this information. So this is all that Srila Prabhupada is asking us to do, to take a scientific process or approach to this spirituality also.
mm. Beautiful. And it's a long introduction. We can continue reading. Although I was scrolling down a few paragraphs below, and Prabhupada starts to describe the there are many scholars and commentators and teachers of the Gita have categorized the subject of the Gita into five truths or five topics or subjects of the Gita, and I thought it could be nice for us to read those five things just to kind of get a framework of the subject matter and the content. Could we read those?
Go for it.
So a few paragraphs down, not very far from what we do, only 2 or 3 from where we are. It says the subject of the Bhagavad Gita entails the comprehension of 5 basic truths. And this is helpful because yesterday early in the week we were talking about was it here we were talking about like what is spiritual, like what does it mean for something to be like we're talking about the mind, the body, and spirit, and
Mm.
like sometimes we lose distinction about what something means to be spiritual. Like if I have like a motion, a fluttering emotion, or some mental experience, does that necessarily mean it's spiritual? And so Prabhupada's going to break down these 5 separate truths in terms of like what is material nature, what is spiritual nature, what is the soul, what is the supreme soul, etc. He says, first of all, the science of God is explained, and then the constitutional position of the living entity, jivas. So he says there's 2 things. There's God, or Ishwar is a name he'll explain, and there's the living entity. There's the soul. There's us, and that basic distinction between the 2 things. And that was Prabhupada mentioning that spirit of devotion of like understanding and accepting that if you're approaching the Bhagavad Gita, there's going to be these 5 basic things, and God is one of them. And if you're approaching this idea of this book, I mean, Bhagavad Gita means the song of God. And so there's this natural question, well, what is the relationship between the soul and God? And so those 2 things are first kind of laid out. There's Ishwara, Prabhupada explains, which means the controller. And there are jivas, the living entities, which are controlled. If a living entity says that they are not controlled, but they are free, then he is insane. The living being is controlled in every respect, at least in this conditioned life. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the subject matter deals with the Ishwar, the supreme controller, and the jivas, the controlled living entities. So those 2 things. Before I move on, do you guys have anything you want to share about that, about being insane?
I kind of love that line actually. Uh, there are some times when Srila Prabhupada just says what he says.
Yeah. I mean,
And I really love that line.
it's so amazing. I know I'm cutting you off and butting in, but I just because yesterday we were talking about like the idea of even just like the spirit of devotion about the 12-step program and the first 3 steps. The first one is just like recognizing like I'm reading this book because I need answers. I'm realizing, Prabhupada mentioned in the Bhagavatam that there's a pinprick in society. There's a pinprick in my life. There's something that's not working. And I have to admit that in order to, I'm reaching out for other answers as opposed to like, I got everything under control and this would just be like a cool little addition. It's like, no, if that's your approach, you're not going to get very far. But if it's like life is broken, things aren't working out, I need an alternate way of doing things. And that's the first step is admitting that there's a breakdown in what's going on. My best thinking got me here. And then came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to, what's the word? Sanity.
I mean,
I think Prabhupada wrote the 12 steps.
I in
Uh,
in thinking about this, there are sometimes kind of in life where I look at people in 2 kinds of categories. There's sometimes where you see people and you're like, oh, you can hear it a lot in vernacular. Like somebody will be like, oh, that person's crazy, and I'm like, no, but at least not in the distinction of like real intense true mental instability. um Sometimes I look at people and I'm like, no, that person's not crazy. They just know what they can get away with and with whom.
hmm.
And so sometimes when someone comes to you with a certain their own brand of how they'd like to act, and there's like the right amount of resistance, they start to change their behavior. And so then I'm like, yeah, no, that's not a situation of real mental instability. That's a situation of they know what they can get away with and with whom. And I think we are all doing this to a certain extent. And I feel like we saw Srila Prabhupada's, this one sentence in full swing during a pandemic. There were so many times I'd look at so many people and like, and this is this, and we can't be controlled and all this stuff. And they would, there were people like, oh my gosh, people are really losing it. They're going crazy. And I'm like, no, they're testing what they can get away with and with whom. And so when we can say all we want, that we are free and not controlled and all of these things, and yet and still we decide to follow some of the rules because we know what we can get away with and
Mm.
how much we can get away with and with whom.
Yeah.
So there are certain rules that if we really want the outcome, we're going to follow. And I think that this leads into, bhakti yoga or any religion. Why does it have to have rules? Why do I have to follow anything? Like, well, you don't. But in order to get a particular outcome, you follow rules all the time. If you want to work at a corporate job, you know what you can and cannot dress like.
Mm.
You know how you can and cannot model your life. And so, whenever we want a particular outcome, we're willing to jump in and follow the rules, submit ourselves, and act under the control of even other living entities. But sometimes, when it comes to the other side of things, we get to religion, we act like there should never be any rules. I should be able to do whatever I want. And I feel like rightfully so, Srila Prabhupada is making a point. Cool. Where is it that you can do it whatever you want? Where? Anywhere in this material world? No. So I think we have to realistically let go of that
Mm.
idea.
Yeah.
This hearing submissively also has us having to kind of let go a little bit of this idea that we are the controllers, we are in control. There's nobody that can control us.
Mm. That was an exercise that when I was moving through 12 steps, and my sponsor had me do this first exercise because I come from a spiritual background, so I was like, okay, some of these steps I'm just gonna like breeze through, like accepting that there's God. Yeah, of course. Okay, like can I just like fast forward to step 4, 5, or 6 or whatever is there? And then realizing actually like, step 1 was powerless, and he was like, just take the week to write down all the ways in which you're powerless. And it was like, it was a meditation. It was just like, and there's so many things you take for granted, um and so it was just like a powerful exercise to just like to realize and based off of, and it's so interesting that Prabhupada first mentions this idea of Ishvara, or the supreme person, and the jiva, the individual soul. And the idea of being powerless can be invoke a variety of different feelings. And Prabhupada would give the definition or the analogy of a cat,
Mm-hmm.
that are the jaws or the mouth of a cat a source of fear or a source of comfort? Well, it depends on who you are and how you approach them. For a mouse or for a rat, the mouth of a cat is death. The mother picks you up in order to devour you and kill you. But for a kitten, it's a sign of comfort. It's a place of protection. It's a reminder that I have shelter. And so this idea of approaching the idea, and Krishna will say in many places later on in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's spending a lot of time about the mood in which we should approach the Gita, the spirit of devotion. And there are many places in the Gita where Krishna will tell Arjuna, I'm telling this because you are my friend. I'm telling this because you are not envious of me. And it's the character and the mindset of Arjuna that qualifies him to receive this message. But then Krishna also reminds it, and don't forget that I'm your friend too. Suhrida sarvadehinam, he'll say at the end of the 5th chapter, I'm the friend of all living beings. And so when we hear this relationship of like powerlessness, the sense is like, I can't give up power. It's like I get taken advantage of, or I lose control. It's this great sense of anxiety or fear. But for the devotee, or for somebody who understands or is able to understand the true position of Ishwar, the true position of the supreme person, it's like letting go of control is the only way that I'll find security. It's the only way that I'll find shelter. It's the only way that I will experience the peace and joy that I'm looking for, because that will allow me to place myself in the hands, not of the mother cat, that I'm the mouse or the rat that's trying to kill me, but I'm the kitten. I love that song. One of my favorite songs is by Trevor Hall. One of my favorite artists is Trevor Hall. Do you listen to Trevor Hall, Chuta?
I have a couple of times.
That means no. She's like, yeah, but I don't want to insult you.
No, I actually have a couple of times.
I've heard him a couple of songs here and there.
Beautiful way.
I love Trevor Hall. I was actually supposed to go to one of his concerts when COVID hit, and I just lost my ticket because that
No
was like
way.
years ago. But anyways, one of my favorite songs. Sorry, maybe you do like him. I was just joking. One of my favorite songs. He wrote this song called Indigo, and one of the lyrics of the refrain is, I've got to go back to those sweet rose indigo. I've got to play like a child in her lap. No defending, no attack. I know that spirit's got my back. And so this idea of just like, I'm just a child in her lap. I'm just like a child surrendering to a parent. No defending, no attacking. I just trust that I'm living with this spirit at my back. And so this mood of approaching Bhagavad Gita in a spirit of devotion. And so that all came to mind when you're talking about powerlessness and letting go of control, because it could be
Yeah,
scary for some people.
of course, but I kind of like that it's not like, oh, let's talk about these 5 blames or these 5 guilt-ridden.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just simple truth.
Mm.
It's actually just truth. It's not something that you did. It's not something that you can be blamed for. It's not something that you can be negatively impacted on just on the basis of this truth. It is simple truth that as jivas, we are more often than not going to be powerless.
Mm.
And so it can be a sense of comfort if we allow it, if we don't take it as this is an attack on me and on my character and on my integrity and on my soul. No, it's just truth.
Yeah. What do you think, Ikishore?
I'm thinking that it all boils down whether we want to know who God is or whether we are trying to be God ourselves. It's really simple. And if you're trying to be God, even though, like, not like I am God, but just that mindset of like, I am the controller. Everything belongs to me. I'm in charge. It's my life. It's my this, it's my that. I can do whatever I want. I can be free. I can do all this stuff. Yeah, Pasha. We have to become submissive. And that's the thing. It's like the idea of wanting to become God is that I am like the ultimate controller, or the ultimate, one that is dominant. And it's actually really, really, it's actually really interesting, because I feel like if you don't have a submissive mindset of approaching this Bhagavad Gita, then you're just not going to get it. Like, it's just that simple. If you're in that mindset of like, I want to be the controller, I want to be God, I want things to go my way no matter what, then it is what it is. And I think it's just something that seems really simple, but it takes a lot of, we were talking about this like a few days ago. It takes a lot of surrender and a lot of just understanding our position, to, like, I'm sure it was mentioned yesterday, we mentioned it a couple of times this week, to at least theoretically accept that Krishna is God in this Bhagavad Gita, right? Because if I can at least do that, then I can at least start to have some of the teachings be imbibed by my mind. But if I can't do that, then it's going to go over my head. And just thinking about the world and how it is, we don't need to get into this so much, but if you look at history, it's basically, really, really super generalized. It's just a bunch of people who want to be in control. Now I'm in more control than you, and now I'm in more control than you, or I have more people on my side than you. I have more people on my side than you. I'm in control. No, I'm in control. And it's really, and it's interesting, because the more that you go into those depths of that ego space, the darker it gets, right? I'm in control of my apartment, of my family, of this person, of all of these people, of this state, of this city, of this nation, of etc. Right? And it can be really, really detrimental and scary how what's the word I'm looking for? Insidious that can be. That feeling of the ego, the false ego, and believing that like it's me, I'm the one. So yeah, that's what's on my thought, on the thoughts on my mind, because it's something that what I was just thinking about was that you have to, let's see, how do I put this? Like, if that's where you're at, if you're in a place where you're not being submissive and you don't want to surrender to God, like that's also okay. That doesn't like discredit you from like love and kindness and empathy and like whatever, you know. It's like that's fine, you know, like okay, you go, you do you, go for it, you know. Aribo. But you're not going to be able to, I remember like in the first paragraph or the second paragraph of this introduction, you're not going to be able to unlock the secrets or approach the heart of the Gita, I think is what Prabhupada says. And I think that that's something that's really important to understand here. That I love that you brought it to these 5 points, because Srila Prabhupada really wants us to understand like what is our position actually. And if we can accept that, like, yeah, my position is this: I'm a controlled, conditioned soul in this material nature, and this is how it works, then I can have some hope of understanding this. If I don't understand those things and I don't want to understand those things, that's fine. You know, you go do your thing, but you're not going to be able to really dive deep into this Bhagavad Gita.
So funny that you say it doesn't discredit you from like being a kind human being. I think there's just maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs down where Srila Prabhupada's like, one hasn't taken to this knowledge. They're a failure in life. I was like, wow, SP, wow.
Yeah, well, what I was saying was it doesn't discredit from receiving that empathy. Like, I'm not going to treat you like, I'm not going to be like, oh, you don't want to be submissive and surrender to God, you're a terrible, awful person who should just like rot, you know. It's like, no, like you still have part and parcel of Krishna in your heart, but maybe your path is just different, you just haven't gotten there yet, and that's fine, you know. Because I think about myself when I was 21 and read the Gita for the first time, and it went over my head, and I wasn't necessarily feeling in a very submissive place, like, yes, I'm surrendering to God and God is Krishna and like all this stuff, you know. If I would have met people that would have been like, then you're evil because you don't, you know, I would have been like, interesting. Okay, don't want to talk to you guys anymore. But I think that empathy for all living beings is something that's really, really powerful and important. And just knowing that everyone's on their path and things come at the time that they need to come, whether in this life or the next. And I think we're running out of time. We are running fresh out of time. Martha says it is so powerful to realize and accept how powerless we really are. Yeah, that's beautiful, Martha. Thank you so much. If anyone else has any takeaways that you want to put in the comments, please do so. And since we're running fresh out of time, we'll turn it over to Kimberly and have her give us some takeaways of today's conversation.
Thank you. So today we're taking away that if we want a particular outcome, we can submit and follow the rules to get there, and that spirit has our back, and Krishna is the friend of all living beings.
Jai. Any takeaways from you, Doyal or Chuta?
You said there was something that you said that was really cool, which is if you don't want to follow the process, cool, but then you don't really get the goal of what this teaching is trying to give in abundance. And just the same way as some of us go through life yearning to be liked by everyone, and it's a hard lesson to learn that just not everybody's going to like you. You're not going to be for everybody, and you have to let that be okay. Sometimes we can think, but I have like the best process in the world, and some people just aren't going to get it this time around. And so this spiritual process is for everyone, with the caveat that they are also willing.
Mm.
And so sometimes it is up to us to know when to just back off and allow people not to get it if they're just not there.
Mm. What about you, Doya?
Just it's okay to be powerless. That's my takeaway.
Mm. I love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Achita. Thank you, Doya. Thank you, Kimberly and Pasha, Martha and Rachna and Lane and Irenka and Rini and Vidya. Thank you all so much for tuning in. For everyone listening out there in the world, thank you all so much. We will see you all tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we'll be talking again about the introduction, but I think it'll be our last day talking about the introduction before we actually start reading the Gita. Tomorrow is episode 100. What? That's crazy. Thank you for keeping track, Kimberly. We would not have known that. Amazing.
Actually, I did see, like, I happened to look on YouTube and we were at like episode 94, 95, and I was like, what? So what happens when you have an everyday podcast? Dang.
God, we should throw a party. Okay, let's see what we're gonna do tomorrow about episode 100. Special.
None of us are gonna make it. We're gonna wake up with migraines, underslept. Kimberly, Pasha, can you take the reins?
I mean, tonight is Thursday night kirtan, so let's see. We'll be at Thursday night kirtan until midnight. We'll wake up at like 8:59.
Pasha, let's throw a party. Hide your wife. Hide your kids.
Hide your kids.
Hide your kids. Okay. Okie dokies.
Didn't think you were going to read that one out loud, did you? Backfire.
with her wife on the live Zoom.
I mean, there is a longer joke with a meme song that has been auto-tuned that goes along with that.
Got it.
Oh God, Krishna. Okay, everyone.
Okay, everyone. We
We'll see
love you
tomorrow.
tremendously.
Love you all. See you tomorrow. Bye. Love you all.